So, thank you very much everyone for coming today. I wanted to start by taking the opportunity to thank our guest, Jordan. He recently has embarked on a project and starting a phenomenal podcast. It's worth the listen. He goes into a real deep dive when it comes to software development and why we do what we do today. And so I'm really glad that Jordan can come join us and give us his presentation. So a little bit more about ourselves and what Took PM does. We're a small group geared towards product managers, but we also cater to software engineers, developers, UX designers, etc. Those who exist also around product and want to learn a little bit more about what product management is, also maybe how to become a product manager, or if you already are one, how to become a better product manager. And so the reason that we're excited to host this event for you today is because I myself am also quite a new product manager, and so this is a great opportunity to learn, why does my role exist? What's the expectations that we have, and how do we then get good at doing it? So first, I wanted to introduce Sasha. She is representing Lovable, who is very nice to host us today. And so please, Sasha, if you can introduce Lovable.
Hello everyone, I'm here alumni, some of you have been here before. My name is Sasha, I am a UX and marketing manager at Lovable. We do have actually a bunch of trainees who end up being product managers. For example, yes, so Jason is also alumni, not our campus, not Tokyo campus, but Amsterdam,
Yes.
I believe. So the Jason chose the product manager class from the beginning.
Thank you for coming. Cheers. Alright, so today's agenda, I want to cover where do PMs come from, how do we make software kind of before PMs, and how has the modern PM role evolved since around 2000. Like I said, so today. A quick bit on me. So I've been a product manager for about 10 years now. Started with my own crappy startup in San Francisco, which is home. Went to China to work on somebody else's crappy startup. And then since then, I've worked at some real companies, PayPal in America, and then Indeed and Wolf and DoorDash here in Tokyo. And recently I started working on a podcast, and I'll make a little plug for that at the end. Okay, so I think it's fair play to let you know up front what I'm going to say. You can decide if you want to pay attention or not. So the conclusion of this talk is going to be that modern PMs are basically the love child of 1930s soap marketing strategists and 1960s aerospace project managers. And then in the 2000s, we evolved into this weird catch-all, support, executive, do all the things job. That's actually like a relatively recent phenomenon. Along the way, I'll make some secondary points that I encourage folks to keep in mind, since I know a lot of us are thinking about what's like the right way to do the job. Everybody's improvising and always has been. There is no right way to do the job. We're all just faking it. Every methodology has some rational basis, even the ones that we like to talk a lot of smack about. Every methodology sucks, but some of them suck more than others. Steve, I'm looking at you. And importantly, like there is no one true agile. Thought a little bit of history of that, like that's just not a thing. Okay, so where do product managers come from? Well, one of the questions is like, what is product management to kind of frame this? And I'm sorry, I'm doing like, what does the dictionary say? This is what Wikipedia says product management is, but I think it's helpful for pointing out kind of the silliness of our jobs. Like, product management is the business process of planning, developing, launching, and managing a product or service. So product management is managing a product. And if folks who are working product managers, you've probably had the experience of feeling, oh, my job is like all the things. That's quite true. Actually, that would be helpful. Quick show of hands, who is a working product manager now? Okay, software engineer? Cool. Project manager? Other, cool. Other folks I'm curious to learn, tell me later. So this is what we're purportedly doing. This is what I think our family tree looks like. So on the right side, we have project management, which really goes back to time immemorial. Like, the ancient pyramids had project managers. And like I really tried to do some research. I was like, I want to tell a story of how project management started. And it really is like, there was a guy with pharaohs or something. Like, it goes all the way back. So project managers, I love you, you're great. You'll outlive us all. On the other side are some of the marketing heritage of product management. And that was brand managers, which started in 1931. I'll talk about those in a second. They evolved into pre-software product managers in the 1960s, 1970s. And then from there, around 2000, project management and product management kind of cross-pollinated creating the modern product manager, as well as the product owner and the scrum master, which come out of the scrum tradition. We'll touch on that. Those have a much more specific origin. 1995, there was a moment, there was a paper. Product management, much fuzzier, evolving field. All right, so let's start with brand management. Our grandfather, so to speak, is Neil McElroy, who was really a formative figure in modern marketing. He was at Procter & Gamble, where he joined as his first job as a new grad after Harvard in the 1920s. He quickly rises up the ranks, becomes an executive, eventually becomes CEO, and he leaves Procter & Gamble to go work for the US Department of Defense, the Secretary of Defense under President Eisenhower. 1957-59, these are some of the toughest years of the Cold War, the most like, oh my God, is the world going to destroy itself? He's the US Secretary of Defense for that. And he said when he joins, I will only give you 2 years because I can't be away from Procter & Gamble longer than that. So like, man loved Procter & Gamble. Which if you're not familiar with it, is a company that makes soap and other like consumer goods, packaged goods. Also like, my life ambition is to have anyone draw an image of me that's like this, right? That's a lifetime achievement, having an image of you like that, let alone on one of the nation's biggest magazines. All right, so McElroy's contribution that gets to product management was the idea of brand man. That was the gendered language at the time. But in 1931, he writes a 3-page memo to the CEO of Procter & Gamble saying, there's something missing in the marketing department. He is 26 years old when he does this, and the CEO had a rule that said all memos must be 1 page. He says, F that, he writes a 3-page memo, straight to the CEO, he's just like a lowly recent new grad, and he says, the problem is that our business is too siloed by function. So you've got a product development group, we've got a marketing group, we have a sales group, but nobody's thinking across all those lines, across all those divisions. So he says, we need people, he's going to call brand men, who will be responsible for a brand and a line of products. And say, I'm just responsible for how do we make this line of products as successful as possible. And I feel some ownership at every level of that, every stage of that process. His focus, coming out of marketing, was saying the brand needs a voice, we need to be doing experimentation with our ads, and there had been advertising experimentation before him, but he really leans into we need to have data-driven experimentation to improve our marketing to make a product line succeed. He was also an important voice in the creation of a soap opera from some of this. He says, we should make content that our target audience wants to watch, and then we can just advertise them to them because they're there anyway. So who's making the purchase decisions for things like soap? It's stay-at-home moms in the 1950s, they're earlier 30s, they'll see the radio, 50s, they're trying to watch television. Let's make programs they want to watch, and then we stick the soap commercials in there. So he's really thinking, how do we be much more strategic about our marketing to make our product succeed? Cool. So this evolves, this idea of brand management, and the language changes from brand manager to product manager. Sort of a slow slide from the 1950s. By the time you get to the 1960s, product management is a thing, product manager is a thing, but it's really this marketing focused role. I have a sense of ownership over the product, but it's really coming from marketing first place. So product management is this marketing business strategy function. This diagram from a 1971 book sort of shows how the industry thought about what a product manager's job was. And so you can see there's these 6 disciplines they call as part of the hexagram of product management. Product planning, coordination, forecasting, profit, and market. So compared to today, you can see there's a lot more financial focus than most of us have, right? If you're a PM, you think a little bit about the money stuff, but here it's clearly a really key part of the story. You also see product is there, but it's in a pretty different sense than today. So the idea in this time is that product means, you're a business person, you go down to the lab and the chemists are working on new kinds of soap, and you say, hey, I think there's a market opportunity for soap that's tough on grease but works on cast iron pans, because that's really popular in our geography, and people have cast iron pans there, but soap is good for that. So you're gonna go down, you're gonna tell the product people that, but you're not gonna get in the trenches with them. You're not gonna put on your lab coat and do chemistry with them. That's the thought of what a product manager's job was, circa 1971. Now let's come over to what's happening on computing and the project manager side. So modern computers, all computers, start in the 1940s, primarily in the Allied countries, Britain, the United States, And it's really coming out of World War II. The Brits are thinking about this primarily for code breaking. The Americans are thinking about artillery trajectories. We're going to fire our cannons at the other guy. We want to be able to know how to hit our target successfully. So early computers really focused on this. It evolves through the military, and as NASA breaks out of the Air Force, and NASA, and this is really where early thinking about software and computing is happening. And so in this space, there aren't products. You're not going to sell code breaking equipment. You're not going to sell artillery solution, ballistic solution finders. But there are projects, right? We're going to solve this problem. There's a lot of resources. We're going to fix it. And so there's a lot of projects and a lot of project management. And this actually creates the team structure that most of us work under. A really important project this time was the Polaris missile program. And the idea of Polaris was in the 1950s, 1956 when the program starts, the United States is really worried that we are lagging behind the Soviet Union in missiles. They've got more nuclear weapons, they've got better nuclear weapons, they're going to win, we're all going to die. This is a very serious problem. This is called the missile gap. Now it turns out, as a historical fact, it wasn't true. The US had an advantage the entire time. But we believed that we did. And so there was a lot of concern. And the thought was, well, if we put missiles on submarines, and we can launch from submarines are basically untrackable, we're safe. Even if they attack us first, we get a bunch of nukes on submarines, we can hit them back, mutually assured destruction, we'll all be safe. So putting missiles on submarines becomes super important, super high priority. You can have all the money you need to get the job done, but you gotta do it fast, because this is life and death. And this leads to some innovations. Previously, you had a project like this, it would have gone through lots of separate contractors, right? You would have had one company do the tail fin design, one team do the warhead part, one team do this, one team do that. Now what they say is that's too slow, we can't afford that. So what we're gonna do is pull in a pool of engineers who we're gonna keep throughout this project. So instead of saying, each company gets ferreted out one part of it, pool your engineers, put them into one space, we're gonna shift those engineers around to different projects as part of this overall project and parts of it. And that creates a structure that looks like this, which is called matrix management. So here you can see you've got lots of engineers, they belong to different divisions, or different disciplines, different functions, and they also belong to different projects. And the thought here is that each engineer actually has two managers, real actual decision-making managers. You've got, if you're an electrical engineer, the head of electrical engineering is responsible for making sure you're delivering excellent engineering. And that's that's what they're there to do. And then the project manager is there to say, overall, is this coming together to solve the problem? Are we making our part of this system work? And then the project managers all roll up to an overall program manager. So this is called matrix management. And this is how we get the cross-functional team. That's kind of almost all working today, probably. This wasn't, again, this is one of those weird things, is to think this stuff always existed. That wasn't a thing before late 1950s when they do this. Turns out the project works. It is very fast. They deliver years ahead of schedule. They delivered technically under budget, but their budget was infinity, so it didn't matter. But they delivered ahead of time. And so this became very cool. This is oh wow, the military did something fast and effective. We're all really excited about this. And so these ideas percolate out. And one of the places that they go after the military is the Digital Equipment Corporation. And DEC is, we'll touch on in a minute, it doesn't really exist anymore. But in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, this was hot. And this was Apple. This was just the coolest company to be at because they were really at the cutting edge. They were doing cool things with tech. They were miniaturizing. Basically, the big bad empire of technology this time is IBM. And they're huge. They're very successful. DEC is the plucky underdog, and DEC goes hard on matrix management. They really embrace this. And what they're really good at is mini computers, which is a thing that doesn't really exist anymore. But you said your giant mainframe computers that fill a room or a big piece of furniture, they're super powerful, they cost millions of dollars. Those are mainframes. The next step down, which would be a cabinet, there were two of these columns, would be a mini computer. And so you'd have a component like this, a couple of peripherals around it, and that would do data processing for your company. And it might cost, in inflation-adjusted terms, $100,000. So it's still super expensive. Regular people aren't buying these, but it's becoming more accessible. So they have a lot of success in this space, but they miss the microcomputer wave, which is what we think of as your personal computer, your desktops. They just miss it entirely. And so they end up going out of business in the 90s, they get bought by Compaq, very convenient end. But when they were hot, they really spurred a lot of companies to try this cross-functional team collaboration matrix management thing. When they die, a lot of companies say, oh, that's bad. Like that was their thing. And lots of other companies really struggled with it and couldn't make it work. So matrix management kind of takes a real hit after this, but it survived today in our software world. DEC, from what I can tell, is one of the first companies to have software product managers. And I can't say that this is the first job listing, but this is certainly the first job listing I can find for a software product manager. This is 1974 in the US, a job at DEC for a small system software product manager. And I won't read through the whole thing, it's in the slides if you want to grab it. But I think it's kind of interesting to see they say, we want someone with experience in the computer industry to become involved with the management of software as a product. And that's like, whoa, software as a product. My goodness, who would have thought software could be a product? So that idea is just happening here in 1974. The software is a thing that people might buy and think about independent of the hardware it's on, it's not an integrated system, it's just software. And if you read through the details, you'll see it's starting to look a little bit more like product management today. There's starting to be a little bit more, I need to do business stuff, but I also need to understand the technology. So these ideas are starting to emerge, but it's still certainly not the mainstream. Product management really remains a marketing, business-heavy function that just kind of vaguely knows about tech for quite a while still. All right, so that's kind of the genealogy up through the 1970s. Before we move forward, I want to touch a little bit on how we used to make software. So those pretty important bearings on how we work now. However bad you think making software is today, it used to be so much worse. So enjoy your job today because it's so much better now. So there's two real threads of how we made software in the past. One of them is what we call waterfall. And you've probably heard this, and you probably have some sense that waterfall's bad. That's what the sense I have. It's like, oh, this is a very waterfall product. That's not good. Where did that come from? Well, the idea of software itself starts in 1958, the term software. Before that, 1956, someone used software to refer to people. It was like, oh, computers are the hardware, and then people are the software. 1958 is the first time someone thinks of software as code, and that code is like a separate layer of the stack from the hardware. It's like, that's not a thing until 1958. 1968, NATO, like the North Atlantic Treaty Organization to defend against the Soviet Union, those guys, their science committee organizes a summit in Germany where they pull together a bunch of the world's leading computer scientists. And they say, we're going to figure out how to make software. But we're just going to first solve the problem. Because at this time, and they deliberately showed, this is the first use of the phrase software engineering, was this conference. They said, we're going to think of software like engineering. And engineering means, bridges and, refrigerators and all that stuff. We're going to figure out the right way to make these things. It's an engineering discipline. We're going to get the right way to do it. We're going to have some meetings about it, we're going to figure it out, publish a paper, and then everyone will know the right way to make software, and it'll be done. And I swear to God, if you read the report, it's online, it's great. They earnestly believe, they're like, they get towards the end of the meeting, like, okay, maybe we need one more conference, but they're confident, they're going to figure out the right way to make software, and it'll be done. 1970 is when we get a canonical version of what we call waterfall now. And this is a guy named Winston Royce. He's a leader at a defense contractor in the US. And he writes a paper, which I'll go into a little detail in a minute, saying, this is how we make software now, this is the right way to make it. But the thing to really understand about this era is that we're coming out of big science, right? Like we just did, especially in America, we just did the Apollo program, we put a man on the moon, we're just gonna science the hell out of stuff, and it's gonna be great. We're gonna find the right way to do things. It's a really, we're gonna reason our way to success. And that's really where this theory of software comes from. And then in 1983, the British government, and then a year later the American military, say, we are going to insist on certain standards in making software. Like if you want to sell software to the government, it's got to follow certain methods, and they really settle on a waterfall approach, a really top-down, well-defined approach. I'll touch on in a second. And as we'll see, this becomes a real challenge for the industry, because it really entrenches a certain way of thinking, a certain way of doing stuff. So this is the Bell waterfall. This is from Royce's diagram, Royce's paper. And he's actually not advocating for this. He's just saying this is how we think software happens. We think you go through a bunch of steps, you come up with your hardware requirements, your software requirements, think about those requirements, make your plan, you execute the code, you test it, you deliver it. You know, those are nice, clean, sequential steps. He says, this is how we think it's gonna work. And I'm like, yeah, this is still kind of how we all think it's gonna work. But he says, this is not ideal. And there's a few problems with this. One, you know, requirements always change, customers always want different things. So you need a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of feedback between your steps. And also, like, you gotta be able to adjust to mistakes, and you gotta have clear plans. And this is just not quite there. So he says we need to make some changes. And then the rest of his paper is describing these changes. And he has three big things he wants to do, a couple of big things he wants to do. The ones I'm gonna highlight are, one, you should take 25% of your time and budget for a project, and you should do a prototype that you know you're gonna throw away. And you're like, this is garbage, but like in doing it, you're gonna discover and learn a bunch of stuff. And then when you do it the second time, you know, you'll do it right. So that's cool. He thinks that, again, there should be some wiggle room, some feedback between steps, and he thinks you should have so much documentation. He says a medium-sized project should have 1,500 pages of documentation, which is, you know, all of the requirements have to be exhaustive, all the pieces have to be exhaustive, it's heavy. And when I first, you know, read this thing, I was like, that's terrible, like this is dumb. But the rational basis to bear in mind is at this time, in 1970, writing software is terrible. You don't have a monitor. Like the idea that just like, oh, you're gonna like have your computer, your monitor, you're writing code. That's not a thing, man. When you were doing code, you were printing it out. Like you would type on a keyboard, and it would print out on paper, and you would review the paper and see if it was what you wanted to do. There was no version control, right? There's no Git, anything like that. Version control doesn't happen until 1977, and even then it wasn't widely available. So like, software's hard and crappy and terrible. So you have to really plan the hell out of it if you're gonna do it. So that's this area. So his improved plan to handle it is you should do this. You should do this, and then you're gonna make good software. And I will spare you walking through this, but it's a lot. You gotta write a lot of documents, you go through a lot of steps, you throw some stuff away. If we just do this, we're gonna make good software. So like the idea, like the key idea here is that like this is a knowable, definable process. It might be complicated. We're gonna identify the right process, we're gonna do it, and it'll be done, it'll be great. All right, so what's the alternative? So the alternative approach is iterative and incremental development. This has its own history that dates back even earlier than this, but I'll start the story in 1959 with a NASA rocket plane. This is a rocket that you stick as basically like where you put the missile under the wing of a B-52 bomber. And the bomber takes off, it carries this plane up to a high altitude, drops the thing off, there's a pilot inside this little rocket. And then the rocket plane takes off, it goes like straight up, you know, to the edge of space, comes back down. And these NASA astronauts, you know, again, all of this work is happening, even stuff in NASA. Remember, the reason that we have NASA, we're putting so much energy into it, is you're learning how to make better missiles to fight the Soviet Union. So even the sciencey stuff is like about the Soviet Union. We're thinking a lot about that. And so it's this little team, and they're trying to figure out how do we do this high-stakes project, how do we figure out how to get to space. And the approach they take is they build 3 planes. And they are constantly, like every week, swapping around components, trying new things. We're going to build a new version of this. We're going to try changing the wings a little bit because they don't know the right way to do it. Right? Like they're right at the edge of science, they're right at the edge of engineering, developing new knowledge. And so they're really taking these little steps, trying different stuff. Works out very well, very successfully. You know, people are really happy with this project. So a bunch of these engineers in the X-15 get recruited to Project Mercury. Mercury was America's first project to put a man on the moon, or a man into space. So the first time we put man into space was on Project Mercury. And a bunch of these engineers get pulled on to do computer programming for Mercury. Now Mercury, the capsule, was dumb. There's no computer in there at all. It's just like a little pressurized room, we send it into space, comes back down. But the computers on the ground had to do a lot of work to control this capsule up in space. And on this Project Mercury, they're doing test-driven development. So like we think about it as a very modern thing, but they're writing the code first, and then they're writing tests first, and then writing the code to satisfy it. They're also working in super small increments. So like they are saying, hey, this is the code I'm going to write for the next 3 hours. And like that's like the level of project. I think there's a couple hours, and I'm going to submit this code for review. So they're really taking bite-sized pieces. A lot of these folks from Project Mercury go on to IBM's Federal Services Division, which was the part of IBM selling software to the US government and to the US military. So they're doing like submarine guidance systems, they're doing space shuttle, and this is really where a lot of these like iterative incremental ideas mature through the 1970s. And then finally, in 1986, the kind of crowning moment for this comes not from software but from hardware, where two Japanese academics, Takeuchi and Nonaka, I forget their personal names, but they wrote a paper called the New Development Game, or it's like New Product Development Game. And what they're saying basically is, we look at these hardware projects in Japan. There's a car made by Honda, it was a Hanson cameras made by Canon, a photocopier from Fuji, saying these projects are being really successful by having what we're calling a bug beat approach, which is where cross-disciplinary teams, cross-functional teams are all physically together in one room. They're being given a hard problem by management, they're being given resources, and then they're just going. You know, they're not being carefully managed, they're not following a fixed schedule, they're just being told, like, for the Honda example, it was the company took a bunch of young engineers, put them in a room and said, build a car for young people, you know, here's money, go. And then they do. It turns out a bunch of these projects were really successful, and the way they tended to work was really incrementally and by having folks from doing all the phases at the same time. So you had people doing market research and prototyping and electrical design, and all of these things are happening at once with people in the same space talking to each other. They're saying, oh, this is really great, we're having all this good feedback, cool things are happening. So this keeps building. And they're calling this the bug beat approach, because it's like people from all these teams all want the ball. And so everybody's kind of trying to get on the project, trying to work on it. Well, it turns out in rugby, the name for that formation, where lots of people are trying to get the ball, is called a scrum, which is probably a familiar term. So in 1995, Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland write a paper and then later books advocating what they call a Scrum methodology for making software. And here what they're saying is you got a small team, talented people, and what they're going to do is they're going to work in iterations. So instead of this whole waterfall, design the whole thing and spend 2 years building it, work in 30-day sprints. Every day in the morning, get together, talk about what you did yesterday, what you're going to do, plan your sprint every month, do some demos, do some retros, get ready to work better, and this is going to be a better way to work. They hate project managers. Sorry, project managers in the room, I love you, but they've decided that project management is this really controlling bad thing. We want engineers to be emancipated and free, and engineers should figure out what they're doing. So to support engineers, instead of product managers, we should have, or project managers, we should have a Scrum Master who cares about the process. Like, are we doing things the right way? Are we having the right meetings? Are we working the right way? And a product owner. And the product owner's job is to be voice of the customer. So like they're in the room, they understand what the customer wants, they can answer questions. Hey, should we do it like this? Should we do it like that? What's the trade-off? This is your product owner's there too. So that's Scrum. And they're directly pulling off of New Product Development Game. That's where they get the name. A couple years later, we get extreme programming. This guy named Kent Beck, and this is kind of a sidekick. Their idea is we're going to take all the good stuff from engineering, and we're just going to max it out. We're going to take it all to 11. So if writing tests is good, we should actually write tests first. So there's always tests for everything. If code reviews are good, having another engineer look at your codes is good, we're going to work in pairs. So that by definition, another engineer has seen all the code all the time. So we're going to take all the good stuff, we're going to crank it to 11. And one of their big ideas was get the customer in the room. And this is actually the customer. Like you should actually have a customer sitting next to you at the table saying, I like this, I don't like that, etc. So you're probably seeing some of these ideas, and when they're evolving to, and of course the place that these things evolve to is Agile, which you've probably heard of. Agile is this big moment in industry software development. I'll take a minute on that, and then we'll cut back how this affects product management. So February 20th, 2001, a group of 17 software folks get together in Snowbird, a ski resort in Utah, talk about having software better. And these were the founders of Scrum, the founders of XP, the founders of a few other related movements, all get together and say, how are we going to make software better? They come out of this with a thing called the Agile Manifesto, which is a short document, 12 supporting principles, which are just, work shouldn't suck. They're really generic. These are not detailed. This is very short. And they have an organization called the Agile Alliance, considered the hardest thing. If you've never, if you've heard of the Agile Manifesto, Agile, that's the thing, this is the entire manifesto. It is 68 words, and the core of it is just that we think Individuals and interactions are more important than processing tools. Working software is more important than documentation. Customer collaboration is more important than contracts. Responding to change is more important than following a plan. And like that's it. Like there's no like second page. So like, I was like, oh, agile, that's like a pig. Like that's all. And so you can look at this and you can say, you know, is it like groundbreaking and super important? Well, in some ways. Remember I just said like the US government, the British government, they had standards saying like, if you made software this way, you couldn't sell it to the government. That wasn't reliable. You needed plans and waterfalls and structures. So maybe this is super important. And here we are 20 years later, and we all talk about Agile all the time. On the one hand, it's kind of trivial. Like, oh, you should listen to your customers. And like, oh, work shouldn't suck. All right. And it's also kind of opportunistic. Because in the following years, of those 17 people, 15 of them wrote books saying, here's the right way to do Agile. And then a bunch of other people who weren't there wrote books about here's the right way to do Agile. Which is when I say there's no one way to do Agile, it's because there's at least 15 of the people who were there, and then a whole bunch of others came later. So let's cut over to how this gets back to product management. So this was 2001. At the same time, we are having the bubble pop. So the dot-com bubble really ramps up 1995, 1996. Huge amounts of money are flowing into new internet companies. You know, the consumer internet is finally happening. And in 2000, the party comes to an abrupt end. And between 2000 and 2002, NASDAQ, which is the market that all the new tech companies are listed on, falls 78% in 2 years. VC gets crushed, I think it's down 88%, 90%, something like that. It's like new venture capital funding is just gone after going up to the sky for the bubble. Somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million US tech jobs are lost. For scale, I know I'm certainly anxious, lots of people are anxious about the current tech job situation. NASDAQ is down 5% from its pandemic high of November 2021, and job losses are a little less than 400,000 from a much bigger base. The dot-com bubble was half of the people working in software. Now it's a tiny fraction. So this was so much worse than however stressful it may feel now. But all these things are happening, but at the same time, clearly the internet's important. Clearly something real is happening. So all the money just caught on fire, but there's still something here. So what do we do now? Well, one of the things that happens is this idea of leanness. So Lean Software is a Lean Software Development and Agile Toolkit. It's a book by Mary and Tom Poppendick, who were consultants, published in 2003. And basically what they did is they took the Toyota production system, which I won't cover, but it's cool, we should learn about it. And they said, what if we do that? We get rid of the pesky part about labor unions and employment rights and all that's essential to the whole story. We'll just forget about that. And then we'll add some Agile. And we'll say, hey, look, we'll make it about computers, and that's Lean Software. So this book comes out in 2003. It's a big deal. If you're ever what's the whole Agile Lean relationship? Lean is a flavor of Agile. Agile's the umbrella, Lean's a particular sort of theory of book. A couple years later, 2005, we get the idea of product market fit. And this is where the business side starts coming in. People are saying, well, why did the dot-com bubble happen? What went wrong? And there's a bunch of financial factors, but one of the factors was people were building stuff without really thinking if there was a market for it. You hear about the pets.com, those kind of web vans, were there actually people who were going to pay for this stuff? Is that real? They weren't thinking about that very much. And so Mark Andreessen, which is Ben, gives us the idea through a product market fit. He attributes it to Andy Ratcliffe, who is another CEO. But he says native product market fit is that basically what Ratcliffe's claim was that the number one killer of companies was a lack of market. Didn't matter if your team was great, didn't matter if your product was great, there wasn't a market, nothing else matters. So he says the only thing that matters is getting product market fit, and product market fit means being in a good market with a product that can satisfy the market. So this idea becomes really important. 2007, Steve Blank writes a book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany. His big idea is don't build your product. That's not the first thing. The first thing is finding customers, getting people to agree. If you build this thing, I'd be so excited, I'd pay you money. I'll give you money now if you build it for me. Find those really enthusiastic people, and he calls this his customer development methodology. So instead of product development, start with customer development, do product later. And then so the final maturation of this was Eric Ries, who was one of the editors, was a student under Blank and then an editor of his book, who writes the book Lean Startup, which is all about, okay, let's start companies around this premise. And he doesn't create the idea of MVP, but he really popularizes the idea of MVP. If you're anything like me, you hate those letters, and I'm going to justify that hatred for you. So the idea of MVP comes from 2001, a business consultant named Frank Robinson. is I consult for big companies, General Electric, these big guys, when they want to start a new line of business. And their question is, I'm the CEO of GE, I want to get into a new business, how much should I invest? And Robinson says, oh, well, you can do some math, you can do this thing. And what you're looking for is the sweet spot of reward to risk ratio. So like, if you think you invest this much, how much reward did you get? If you invest that much, how much reward did you get? And that sweet spot is called an MVP, a minimum viable product. Reese takes this, he applies it to software, but then he kind of just says an MVP is whatever you want it to be. He literally says, like, an MVP is the thing that proves that customers want your product. So some examples feel kind of real. So Zappos, the shoe store. He says it's MVP was the guy goes to a real shoe store, takes pictures of the shoes, puts them on his website, and then says, you can buy the shoes from me. And when someone places an order, he goes to the shoe store, he buys it. Here, then he goes to like Dropbox. He says Dropbox's MVP was a video. It's just like a mock-up. Like if I could build this thing to sync the files. So that's an MVP. So MVP doesn't mean anything, don't take it seriously. But this is an evolution of these ideas that have become really powerful. Same time, wrapping up here, quants, right? This idea that everything can be quantified. Comes out of technologies from post-2000, especially Hadoop. Hadoop gives us the ability to process lots of data in parallel, making data analysis much more possible. Combined with JavaScript logging, what users are doing on your page, something we can A/B test everything. So this is another new technology that emerges post-2000s, gives a lot of capabilities. And finally, project management really goes through a decline in the 2000s. There's a secular shift from projects to products. Products become much more common. These emphasis of ascendant methodologies like Agile, continuous iteration, no finish date, really makes it tough for project management to lead. And then lastly, in 2001, Google fires all of the project managers in engineering. Not for like a particularly good reason, but basically because Larry Page felt like they were getting in the way of him telling engineers what to do. He said, well, there's project managers, and they sometimes disagree with me. I don't like that. So fire the project managers, hire a set of product managers who report to Page, make sure that they'll do what they want. And honestly, like a big part of the story of software in the last 20 years is see what Google does and copy it. And so I think that's probably a factor in the story as well. So when you put these pieces together, we see that in the 2000s, there's just a lot more stuff to do that isn't writing code, but also isn't like marketing, right? There's like, okay, what exactly, we're gonna define the product, you need to do that before you start engineering, you need to do a lot more analysis, and all of these pieces need somewhere to go. And project managers have kind of lost their shine, but these also call for a skill set that a lot of engineers don't really have and don't really want to be doing. And so I think this is really what creates product managers in the modern sense. We took the old marketing role that was kind of slowly moving towards more product stuff, whereas it was all these jobs to be done, these are the people that do it. Note that we don't show up in any of the methodologies. Like the Agile Manifesto, Lean Software Development, there are no product managers in any of those stories. The first of the books that I've talked about that mentions us is Eric Ries's Lean Startup, which was 2011. So we're a very recent thing, and we're really improvising our jobs, and we're kind of getting shoehorned in to solve different problems. And that's how I think we've become this sort of jack of all trades job on development teams. So what? Told you this whole story. Why does it matter? Let's take away. Well, one key idea is everything is uncertain, and that's actually good. There have been a lot of times in the history of the software industry where, especially business leaders, have said, we're going to standardize. We don't need more innovation. We know how it's going to work. We're just going to build processes that work for the current system. And those always kind of suck. They take all the fun parts out of the job and they make it a really repetitive grind. So it's actually great for us that things are uncertain and things are changing. The job has changed a lot. I really encourage you to embrace the uncertainty because it hasn't been stable. The things you do now are not things PMs were doing 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. That's good. Keep embracing the new stuff. And like I said, there is no one right way. There might be some way that's optimal at this moment in time in this exact context, but the context is changing. Moore's law is happening, business is changing. So I really encourage, don't get caught up in what's the right way, figure out a good way. And don't buy anything that someone else is selling because they're probably a consultant. Two last questions. So will businesses just decide they don't need us? Airbnb got rid of their product managers a while ago. I know people were worried about that. But don't worry about it. The jobs to be done are durable. The things that need done, there's just more and more of them. Our jobs have been expanding because people need more and more stuff from us. But the titles have shifted and they'll keep shifting. Product managers used to be marketing, project managers did execution. These things are moving around, they'll keep moving around, but the work is still valuable, still important. So keep learning, stay flexible, I think you'll be fine. Lastly, like, what about AI? Yeah, man, I don't know. I think as long as the change is marginal, it's fine. Like, technologies have come along and made new things possible, they've obviated old parts of the job. Think of the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet replaced huge numbers of the tasks, but like, there are still accounts. So I think that we've mostly succeeded as an industry by embracing new technologies. So I encourage you to embrace stuff, because the problems are still going to be there even with new tools, and I would be super bored if we did solve the problems. But maybe AIs create utopia, maybe they create hell, I don't know. I'll see you guys there. And that is all I have. Thank you very much for listening. And then I'll make a shameless plug for my podcast on the history of software development. It's called Product Fundamentals. It's on all the apps or productfund.com. Check it out. Let me know what you think. That's everything from me. I guess happy to open up if we got a couple minutes for questions still, happy to take a couple questions. But historically, like, in the early days, hardware and software were super tightly coupled, which is why like, we didn't have the word, we had computers for 10 years without the word software, because the idea was that the programming was just like fundamentally baked in. And so the idea of separating them and that they could really be two different layers of abstraction, comes. You think about, okay, what is all this stuff about methodology and how we build things, how does hardware fit in? So I think that there's one of the things that's been really empowering growth in software and letting us build cooler products in software is we keep abstracting away more of the problems. So like, the only things I talk about in the show is like, cloud computing. Like suddenly, like, you don't have to own hardware. You don't have to think about hardware. Like that's a thing you do for a web UI instead of like wires and cables and stuff. And so that's been like, that separation has been really empowering for product people and also for engineers to say there's a bunch of things they don't have to worry about, they can focus more. So I think the separation and the layers of abstraction have been really helpful for software people. At the same time, I think that hardware is learning from some of the success of hardware, or of software, processes like Agile, Lean and all. Lean really comes from cars. Like lean manufacturing is how Toyota never used the word lean. That was like American 1980s, 1988, someone came up with that word. So they're sick of saying Toyota production system. So they just called it lean. But so those ideas have been in hardware for a long time. And a lot of the iteration work comes from hardware. I think that recently we are seeing some sort of cross-pollination back of ideas from software that actually had their genesis in hardware generations ago. We had success in software, and now some of those ideas of lean and agile are spreading into hardware. But also we have anything like lean marketing and lean sales. Everybody's trying to figure out how do we take some of these ideas and either find really good, valuable things to spread, or how do I make a buck as a consultant by using the word lean and sprinkling it over something. So I think there's, I guess those are some of the cross-pollinating flows I would think about. I'm not sure I gave you a great answer, but those are some things I'm thinking about.
They give you some sort of context.
Okay, I'll take that.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Can I have everyone stop with giving a really big round of applause? Well, it went a little bit longer than expected, so ours of conversational time is cut a little bit short. Quite a bit short. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank Jordan. You put quite a lot of effort into this. Do like from the bottom of our podcast, you want a little bit more context about software development. It's very eye-opening, especially for those who don't have experience. And so hopefully you write the book and we will get it. Thank you very much, Jordan.